So first thing is, if you have not already downloaded, go to the App Store, download Poll Everywhere. The username is TCAU. That way, when we have poll questions, you can vote and then ask questions, especially out in the branches. I'm stuck at 8. Oh, that's what, it's not a recount. I forget if it's going down or up. All right, let's kind of check in while everyone's kind of doing that. We want to check in with the branches there and just to make sure we can. All right, there we are. Well, Winter Park, got a good crowd there. Hi, everyone. Oh, 2 tables over there. Good. Altamont. How's everyone up there? Hey, Seminole County. Ocoee. Oh, there everyone is. And then Celebration. All right. Hi, everyone. Good. Oh, hey, Lil. All right. Excellent. Excellent. All right. Everyone downloaded the app? All right. So, everyone busy? Yeah. It's like crazy. All right. Interest rates. By the way, the market this morning is going crazy because the Fed now just signaled this morning they may cut the rates. So if they cut those rates, it's going to make this commercial market, which is perfect, it's going to heat up. It's already hot. It's really going to heat up because one of the things we're going to see today is on the commercial market, the interest rates are much different than home rates. They're all based on prime. And when the Fed cuts the prime, the banks cut their rates, which means it's better to buy. It's a great time to buy commercial property. You know, the commercial property kind of lagged behind the residential in the recovery process after the recession. So you're going to still keep it moving. And there's some great resources around town. For example, UCF has every year a commercial real estate symposium that I went to in April. And they're talking about everything that's going on. One of the big things that's going on is the industrial space, warehouse space in Orlando is becoming a mega center of the South. For years and years, it was Atlanta. It was a lot of the distribution centers for the Southeast. It's shifting now, believe it or not, to Orlando. Anyone want to know who knows why? Huh? Perfect. Yeah. So as you're miserable going through I-4 and, you know, the exit that how many people have missed the exit? Yeah, me too. I mean, it's like, what do you mean? It's like 2 miles back, you know? It's like, you really got to pay attention nowadays. It's really crazy. But what you're seeing out there now is because of this great road system we're going to have, which, by the way, in case anyone doesn't know, this road project is the largest construction project in the United States history. Before this, it was the Big Dig in Boston, about almost 10 years ago. Now, this is the largest construction project in the whole US ever. It's over 2 billion, 2.2 billion, and of course it is delayed. Surprise, surprise. I found it interesting. I just came back from New York a week ago, and you know, LaGuardia is building a brand new airport on top of the airport that's there. So you want to talk about a mess in traffic, go through LaGuardia these days. But I noticed the GC is the same company that's building I-4. So those guys are busy. I got to check out their stock. It might be a good stock to get into. So the commercial real estate is really, really taken off. We see a lot of things going on. Now, for example, the office market is still soft. Like in Orlando here, downtown, we got one new office tower going up. So you got to play downtown Orlando now, musical buildings. All right, everyone up to date? The Bank of America building on Livingston is no longer B of A building. The name's down. They took it down about a month ago. No, about a month ago right now. So where's B of A going? They're going to the SunTrust building. SunTrust Tower is going, the word is coming down. Okay? And by the way, SunTrust is no longer going to be SunTrust. Did anyone hear their new name? I think it's stupid. Truist. Truist Bank. I bank at Truist. Just wait. When you get turned down for the loan, you're going to be, the falsest bank. So I don't know, whoever. By the way, I read this article that they did 10 different marketing experts, and there was 1 out of the 10 that thought it was good. The other ones were like, really? I don't know, it'll be interesting. So that's going to be SunTrust and BB&T going together. Now, commercial market, as you start driving around starting today, start looking at branches of BB&T and SunTrust. That one's closing, that one's closing, that's going to close. All right. I mean, right here, Orange Avenue, I'm sorry, Colonial, you got the one at SunTrust at Bumby, and then the brand new one right there on the left of BB&T. One of those is going to close. Right here at Orange in Michigan, you got BB&T in the corner, and a block away SunTrust. I can tell you right now, the one on the corner will stay. It's a better location. So get creative, get investors. The big thing right now is what can you do with old bank buildings? Because they're diminishing the amount of branches because people don't go into banks anymore. You do everything online. You do your deposits online. You don't go in. So here's a kind of niche market if you can figure out ways to use those facilities and go out and market them and get your commercial practice bigger. Like, for example, some places are doing, like, trying to turn them into restaurants and bars. Like I was in one city, I think it might have been Denver. They took one of these old bank buildings. It's now a bar restaurant called The Vault. Kind of good. Other things that they're doing reuse for the building is they're making them into, I call them dock in a box, right? You see those popping up all over the place. They're like the center cares. So they're using those buildings for that. So there's a big, big market right now, and there's going to be a whole lot more of them for stuff like that. All right, has everyone downloaded the app? Oh, and by the way, SunTrust doing Truist is now going to be in that new building behind Church Street Station. So that's the only new building that we've had downtown Orlando that's been built like in the last 15 years for office. Office market, the core is still soft. On the suburbs, it is getting better. There's still an abundance of space, like out in Maitland Center. There's still a lot. The Millennia area is pretty strong. Some of the burbs on each side of town, like Mary is still a good, strong one. I don't think there's much building going on up there. So it's starting to fill in the commercial area. Lake Nona is kind of hot right now. So again, now when we talk about commercial real estate, don't remember, it's not only sales, but it's rentals, because on these commercial, you can make some great commissions. All right, everyone try to, come on, who's the pessimist? All right, we just want to make sure it's working. It could be a little cloudy out. It's another, that's this afternoon when the rain comes. All right, so make sure we get that on there. Yeah. All right. So the difference on there, generally they have longer close times than residential, because we'll see there's more due diligence to do, there's more steps to do, much different lending requirements. We're going to go through that. Big thing is use restrictions. You got to go through that all the time. Like I got a building next door that's been for rent. I just got an email from the agent. Well, it's really hard because a lot of the people that are looking at it want a retail component. Well, it's zoned O1. Can't have a retail component. So you got to make sure the use is, and believe me, they look to you for this. So you got to make sure you know what to do. And a big thing is environmental issues. So on residential, no one gets a phase 1. On commercial, what they do is, we'll go into it, but they get, first the bank will do a survey. And what they do is, it's called an environmental survey. So what they do is they look in the history and make sure, usually it's within a 6-block area. If there's never been a dry cleaner or a gas station, they won't go any further. If it's had an environmental issue, then they'll get a phase 1. So most banks now, if you're smart and sharp enough, they'll want a phase 1. You say, no, how about we just do a survey at first? Saves your clients thousands and thousands of dollars. And then the other good thing is, in residential, they don't pay you, you got to sue them, your commission. Commercial, if you follow what I tell you today, you get a lien on the property. So in commercial, real estate agents are allowed by law to put a lien on. On residential, you cannot by statute. So that's a big difference. So commercial lobby is pretty good on that. So Examples are office buildings, industrial warehouse, retail, apartment complexes, hotels. Apartment complexes are still hot, whether they're, 8 units or 800 units. Especially downtown here, we see all these ones that are being built. A lot of them are being sold as soon as they're completed. What they're doing is they're renting them up. Like one of the great examples was right after the recession, Steelhouse, right there at Colonial and I-4. Built it real nice. And I know some people that moved in and they're like, Barry, I can't believe they no security deposit. What? Why would you get no security deposit? So they took the position, if you had good credit, you had a good job, we're not going to get a security deposit. That way they can fill it up. Well, they filled that thing up like that. And as soon as it was filled, they sold it for record-breaking numbers. Now, the other good thing is why these apartment complexes are going up is financing. Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, they're doing financing on these apartment complexes that's very attractive and fixed rates. And we're going to get into that a little bit of how traditional lenders usually would have 3 to 5 year terms, but now the trend is going longer, and I'm going to show you how you can do that. So, and then again, hotels, Orlando is either first or second in the nation of number of hotels. Those are selling a lot. And there's a lot of development right now. We have a client up in Seminole County is building one new hotel, and he's getting ready to do a $10 million loan on a second one. So that's still a very, very strong market today. Especially it's strong if it's more in the mid-range. The cheaper budget ones, it's a little bit saturated. The very high-end ones, it's a little bit tougher to do, but those mid-grade ones. And the other thing too is there's really, in the hotel business, it's called flagged and not flagged. So a flag, think about it, you put up the flagpole, and flagged is if you're a franchise. So you're a Marriott, you're a Hilton, you're any of those. Now the thing too is there's really only about 3 super flags out there. For example, we were looking the other day on the Marriott website. They have about 20 brands right now. Like, for example, anyone ever hear of or stay at a Moxie hotel? Huh? No. What's that?
I was one in Paris. There's no closet and hang your clothes on a bar. Just in Paris.
Oh, well, in the U.S., it's a Marriott hotel, and that's the new hip Millennia hotel. Element is another one. So, but they're all there. So you got the budget ones over here, and then Marriott and Hilton. So one of the things is, for example, Marriott has a line called the Masterpiece. So that's where they want you to take that a local owner to get that franchise, and they want to make it specialized. And on the Hilton side, they have that too. So they want it more to be attuned with the local community and tie in better and themed better for it. So there's a lot of stuff doing there. Now, unlike residential, probably 95% of the time attorneys are involved. And I know a lot of you are like, oh, I don't want to do that. But you're really missing the boat if you don't, because it will make the transaction smoother because there's so many more different elements of it. And you got to draft the contracts. There's more complex title issues. There's different issues on title insurance and what lenders are going to require. There's zoning issues. For example, we're doing one right now that one of the things we're putting in there is we want to make sure that we get a zoning letter from the municipality, because the way it's really showing on the property appraiser, we know it's not right, but we want to ensure that for future use, we can do it. So we get zoning letters. And then there's tenant issues. On these commercial ones, there's much more issues involved that you've got to do. Now, the other thing is a lot of banks sometimes want an attorney opinion letter to go with the loan. So that's where the borrower's attorney has to write an opinion about the borrower, that we reviewed their books and records, we reviewed their corporation or their LLC, and they have the requisite authority to do what they need to do. So a lot of them require that to be done. And the good thing is most good commercial agents, when they get a client come in right off the bat, they're going to say, who's your attorney? Well, I don't have one. We're new in this market. So if they don't have one, try to set them up with someone, we're of course, we're available for that. And we do a lot of that. So it's good to get in from the beginning because, and the other thing too is it makes sure you don't waste your time. Because what we do is we'll sit down with you and the client and we'll go through the process. And then some people are the buyer or the seller may be very sophisticated. It's good, it's easy. And then some of them are like, oh, I didn't even know I had to do these 12 different things. So we make a little checklist going through. We find out about their wants and needs, what's their concerns, what they want to do, what their end goal is. And then the other thing, for example, we talk to them is we say, well, have you discussed this with your CPA? What do I need to do that for? Well, there's a lot of tax advantages here. So, and a lot of times what we'll recommend they do is to buy the building in a separate LLC, have their business rent from that LLC. So you create some tax advantages in there and some depreciation on the building. And then when you go sell it, you can do a 1031 exchange and not involve your company. So we usually sit with the CPA and do that. And then there's a lot of tax advantages of doing that. So it's always great to do something like that. All right, so a lot of times in commercial properties, we do letters of intent. How many people have used them? Okay, it's kind of a split decision on them. I prefer not to use them if I don't have to, because it really is a waste of time. Real estate agents cannot draft letters of intent. It is the practice of law, no questions about it. It will come back and haunt you. We had an agent who did this and did the letter of intent and did it wrong, and it bound his buyer, and the buyer has now sued, is now suing the agent and the brokerage for over $100,000 because they didn't have some magic language in there. And I know you guys hear me joke, y'all went to the Far School of Law, but it really did get them into a bind on it. Now, on some, I use them if it's, just to make sure if there's a lot of moving parts and we just want to narrow the issues and get someone involved in it, then we will use an LOI. Like, for example, I have someone right now, a client out of Denver that was buying a business. Oh, and by the way, too, this involves not only real estate, you can also do buying and selling of businesses. So we were doing one, and there was a lot of moving parts to it. So, and the seller was all over the place. And I said to them, look, this is going to be, probably a 40, 50 page contract. So the seller seems wishy-washy. Let's get them into an LOI first to make sure we're all on the same page. We went back and forth. And after 3 months, the buyer was supposed to actually start working there before closing because they didn't want to close till January. Start working there, matter of fact, last Monday. And then 4 days beforehand, the seller said, no, I'm not going to do it. So luckily we didn't spend all that. It would have cost him probably $5,000 to do a 40-page contract on it. So in that case, it was good. But so sometimes I will use them, but I'd rather just cut right to the chase, just do the contract, bang it out, get it done, and do that. So the letter of intent is the big thing is, they're non-binding, so they're really a waste, but it can get people on the same page. You have to identify the property, the parties, the purchase price, escrow, inspection periods, closing periods, set forth the brokers and the commission, and the party's cost, who's paying what, and then any kind of special clauses that would be involved. And the big thing is the non-binding language, because that's where this agent got caught up. They didn't put the non-binding language, but the agent even said in an email to the buyer, hey, don't worry about the letter of intent. Letters of intent are non-binding, but they didn't put the language in there, so therefore it was binding. And now the seller is going after him for it, so now they're going after the agent. So you just got to be careful on them.
Are we allowed to ask questions?
Sure.
You're saying it's illegal for a real estate agent to draft a letter of intent?
I believe it is, yes.
I draft them all the time.
Sure. And so do agents write special clauses. and write
so-
things on digital. I believe, I look at I looked at this, as an attorney, I have to look at the law and what it says. Technically, you're drafting legal terms. You do not have a license to practice law in the state of Florida. So why should you be able to write? Well, that's what that agent thought. Now it's going to cost him $100,000.
So if you have like an attorney written one that's like a skeleton and then you just use it for everything.
Well, what some of my agents do is they'll use like a template I have,
Yeah.
or they'll work with me and they'll do a draft, but they have me do the final review and change of it just to give it the blessing. And that kind of works good. That's why you need a good partnership. But in this other one, agent knows it all, did it all, sent it out. They're a know-it-all. It's really, and they're wrong. And their O&E carrier has pretty much said, you're screwed. So you just got to be careful. Stay in your lanes, as I say. Yes.
Yeah, I'm a traditional residential agent, so I'm looking to branch into more building, subdividing lots and stuff like that. Should I be using residential or a commercial one?
Contract? Okay, so good question. When you're looking at subdividing the lots, probably definitely will not use a FAR bar. Do not. And by the way, the commercial contract, matter of fact, I just this morning had an email from an attorney in Miami that this is a $10 million deal. Okay, so usually I'm representing the buyer. We wanted to write the contract, but they said, no, the seller's doing it. He sent it up on and by the way, it's a FAR commercial contract. It is not a FAR bar. The bar does not endorse it or condone it. They actually don't. So the attorney did it on the FAR contract. We had to do some revisions to it. And he writes this morning, can't we just use the FAR bar commercial contract? Yeah, I think that will just take care of what we need to. It's a $10 million deal. I wrote back and I said, first of all, it's not a FAR bar contract. It's a FAR contract. And no, we gave you an addendum. It's only 4 pages, but it covers what needs to be done. And we'll go over what some of the things that it doesn't have. But in that case, when you're subdividing lots, just use the vacant land contract. And by the way, the vacant land contract is a FAR contract. So
Even if it's, there's a house on it, this doesn't matter?
no. I thought you said it was vacant land.
Well, it may not be vacant, but some of the, there's
Well,
something on it, it could be house, but we're looking.
It depends what you're doing. You're going to keep the house or tear it down. Then I wouldn't use a FAR bar because it's got all that language in there about maintenance and things like that. So I would either use a commercial or the vacant land contract, or maybe a variation. You know, that's where you need an experienced attorney to come in and help you and say, hey, you know, everything doesn't fit in those little box. You know, we evaluate what it is and say, you know, let's use I'd probably use the commercial contract, and then with a nice little addendum to address a few of the issues about the house and what's going to happen and things like that. Okay, so what would you use a letter of intent to engage a stagnant seller? Yeah, maybe get them motivated, see what they're doing. Specify the terms, yeah, just to set the terms, yep. I wouldn't, it's not necessary. Call me. Draft the terms before execute the contract. You really don't do the terms, it's just the outline of them. Condense a purchase contract to summary, yeah, real estate agents cannot write. It allows the interest for the parcel of land in the building while potential buyer does it. No, it also shows interest in a parcel of land while you don't use a buyer. I will never tell a buyer to spend a dime or do due diligence when you have a letter of intent. Why would you spend money and do it and then you don't have a contract? Negotiating, yep, that kind of goes in, lay out the terms. Yeah, so you know, you can kind of use them. And one of the big things is on those, and a lot of agents forget to do is when's the contract going to be done? And who's going to do it? So what I find in there is they forget to put in there who's going to draft it, who's paying for it, and when's it going to be done. Like I had one, they put it in there, seller's attorney will draft the contract within 5 days of this letter of intent. I'm like, did anyone call the seller's attorney and see if he could do it in 5 days? Oh, no. Well, they called the seller's attorney. He goes, no, I'm not doing it in 5 days. So, okay, so you guys kind of get the outline on it. So it's again, so here's kind of a sample letter of intent, just so you know. So it's intent to enter a contract. This was for an office pad, 5,000 square feet. The building pad will be entitled with the right to build up to 5,000 square feet, plus the right to pave parking with the parking ratio, because parking is a big issue. Make sure it's got good parking as part of a larger overall office park, subject to the owners association, who the buyer is going to be, who the seller is, the purchase price, initial escrow, inspection period, exactly what that's going to be and what's it entail. Yep. Okay, you're like messing with me now. I'm not doing it. Okay. Preliminary surveys of it, master site improvements, because sometimes you need these copies of environmental. Okay, I always get from my sellers all their due diligence and everything. Here's the other thing too is, we all run into residential, the inspection. No, I'm not going to give it to you. Well, in commercial, it's typical they do. You put a clause in there that if the deal falls, that the buyer will give everything to the seller, their survey, the environmental, all that. That's pretty common. You negotiate sometimes whether they're going to pay for it or not. And of course, if I'm representing the seller, I'm going to put in there, I want all that, because if you walk away, at least I get something that I can use. Second escrow deposits, very, very common in commercial. After you finish your due diligence, your closing period, and it's very common in commercial contracts to have built-in extensions. Already up front, everyone's on the same page. I have one right now with the hotel that it was supposed to close. We built it in there, $25,000 non-refundable if they don't close for the first to buy another 15 days, gets credited to the purchase price. And then if they need another 15 days, which I already know they're going to, it's $75,000. So what happened on the deal is the seller's attorney I've known for years, and I just said to him, is your guy really going to be ready? Because this really is pushing it. He said, well, since we're just kind of talking, no. So I said, well, let's not play a game. Let's just put extensions in there now. So I wanted more, we wanted like $100,000, 50-50. He balked. I said, look, just give me 25 up front for the first, and then 75 if you need the other. And he was like, that's fine. That's fair. We did it. They've already paid us the 25. The next one's due in 7 days. So they're going to end up doing closing period, who's paying closing costs. You make sure we get the brokers up front. And then the other thing too is the contract. Who's going to draft it? Because that's a big thing. That's a real big thing, because that's control of the transaction. And it makes a big, big difference, even if you use a FAR contract, because there's certain advantages, whether you're the seller or the buyer. In the FAR bar on residential, it's pretty fair on stuff, but on commercial, it's very, very different. And the other thing too is, see, this letter is considered non-binding. It's intended to serve as notice that they intend to negotiate a formal agreement. So you've got to put that in there. This is what that agent forgot to put in, and it became a binding agreement. So you want to make sure that you have all that stuff in there, and who's going to pay for it too, because that's a lot of times because those commercial contracts, it's a $10 million deal. I would never do a $10 million deal on a FAR contract, on a form contract, never. It makes no sense. So I know that guy doesn't know what he's doing. All the way, it shows their cards. I mean, it's real easy to read the other side. When they do something like that, oh God, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. So it's good in playing the game of what you can do. Okay. Okay, we kind of went over that of how and there's a lot of litigation over LOIs. Over the years. All right, residential versus commercial. Commissions are sometimes higher with commercial. Therefore, sometimes they're less frequent because it takes more time to do them. The rate may be determined by the services requested, because sometimes what we do is some agents will take a fee as just on the sale, and then they'll also negotiate up front if they know their buyer is buying this as an investment. don't sell yourself short that you're just gonna get the acquisition form. When we have that initial meeting, what are you gonna do with the property? Well, I'm gonna take half and then I'm gonna rent out the other half. So I'll kick my agent under the table and, and go, oh, well, Tim certainly will be able to help you with that. And so let's get that on the table right now too, right? Because you don't want to give them a chance to go, well, I was talking to my brother-in-law's sister-in-law's sister who does residential, and she said she can handle the commercial part of that. You just lost it. Okay, so if you get it right up front, we'll get them to sign an exclusive leasing agreement for the commercial up front also. So it's just good to, again, get that all up front, and then you get another commission out of it. Then they may say, well, it's just an investment. I live up in New York. I just want an investment down here. Well, who's going to manage it for you? Oh, I didn't think of that. I'll kick into the table again and go, oh, yeah, Tim, you can do that for him too, can't you? Oh, of course. Right. So now you get some management out of it too. So you always want to keep all those options open. All right. So some of the challenges, some of the big one is the buyer's use requirements. Like I said, sometimes I've had some property I could rent it 100 times, but it's not zoned for it. We had one a few years ago down the street where the seller's like, look, I'm making no representation of warranties of what this place could be used for. It's up to the tenant to determine that. So we put right in the lease that the seller makes no representation of the use, zoning requirements allowed for this property. Buyer represents that they have investigated and are satisfied to the use. Okay, well, they didn't. They got in there a month after their code enforcement said 30 days you're closing. And the tenant says, well, said to the landlord, I'm not paying anymore. Oh yeah, you are. Yep. And they paid on that lease until we got it re-rented. So you got to be careful of the use on it. Of course, market demands always play into effect. The other thing is regulation. You got to be careful of ADA requirements. Right now, especially hotels are hit up all the time. There's attorneys, unfortunately, that make their entire living just suing hotels on ADA. They go around with a leveler and with a tape measure. I had a client once down in Kissimmee. She was a hotel. She was sued for ADA because it was 1/8 of an inch. The incline on the ramp was off 1/8 of an inch. Yep. And the ADA. By the way, that attorney sued like I think 65 hotels in the Middle District of the federal court. It got so ridiculous, the judge told the attorney, you're not filing another lawsuit in my court ever again. If you want to file a suit, you have to get permission of the court. He got so ticked off because it was so ridiculous. But they are out there. I had another client last year who got hit up that they're an ADA. There's all kinds of ADA requirements that have to be met. So they have to be investigated, workplace access. So, if someone says they're opening a certain business, we inquire whether there's going to be that issue, whether it's to be grandfathered in. So you always got to know the risks of it. Whether you're on the seller side or the buyer side to know what's going on it. I always know if I'm missing one. Okay, so requirements, license, y'all got that, so that's all good. It's not a special license. There's usually a higher standard on commercial There's sales ability. It's a whole different market, ability to discuss internal rates of return. So a lot of clients, if you're doing listings and it's rental property, you'll be able to put in your offering what the ROI is on it. Capitalization rates, gross rent multipliers, and analytics. So you see some of these big commercial firms, they have software and they put together a beautiful book. When I represent clients who are selling hotels, they put these together. I had one a few years ago. There was a commission dispute, and they're like, "Oh yeah, this thing cost us, what they claiming $20,000 to put together the marketing thing." And we got to arbitration. I finally asked him under oath, "What software do you use?" Told me, and I'm like, how long did it take to produce this? It was only about 4 hours. So I said, it didn't cost you $20,000, did it? Well, you know, when you take an account, I said, you're under oath, sir. Make sure you answer this question right. The arbitrator goes, yeah, answer his question. Didn't cost the 20,000. They were full of it. But the software is great. It was great. I mean, it made a nice package, and you really do need that on some of the stuff. All right, financing. So there's all kinds of things out there. It's a great time to finance because there's all kinds of ways to do it. So there's the traditional way of a bank. All right, so there's the banks and there's the non-bank banks that are out there doing them. Insurance companies, you know, insurance companies, they finance most of the office buildings. Like in Maitland Center, I'd probably say half of them are financed by insurance companies. Why? They have lots of money. They want to make long-term investments, and they're liquid. Generally, they're liquid. A lot of private lenders out there. SBA. All right. A lot of my clients were saying, oh, I'm going to go to an SBA. Why are you doing an SBA loan? My banker said to do it. I said, you need a new banker. Well, why is that? Why do you think a lot of bankers recommend doing an SBA loan? Huh?
They want the guarantee of the SBA.
Right, it's because the SBA guarantees it. What else?
They don't want them going to competition.
The what?
They don't want them going to the competition.
No, competition's cheaper. SBA loans always cost more, by the way. Always cost more. They make more money on an SBA loan. The bank makes more money. Remember, banks aren't, you know, they got us in the mess before. They do what's good for them, not what's good for you. So I always tell clients, exhaust your other avenues before you look at an SBA loan. Because if you can save, the interest rate will be better and the closing costs. I mean, we're not talking about a few $100s. We're talking about sometimes $5,000 to $10,000 more by going to an SBA loan. Now, sometimes they are good. If you don't have a long track record, you have less money to put down. It's a restaurant. You know, banks don't do restaurants. SBA will. So sometimes they are good, but I always tell people, there's also government grants and incentives out there for certain kinds of businesses out there. So you got to examine all of those.
The other thing to watch out for on SBAs is generally they will have personal guarantees that will bind everything you own.
Oh, of course. But you know, bank loans always have personal guarantees too. I mean, 99% of the time too.
They'll collateralize your house, everything.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, it's because it's a riskier loan. But again, I love the banks that go, oh, you should go SBA. That's the way to go. It's like, yeah, that's the way you go because we put money in your pocket. Did you used to work for Countrywide? Some of you know what I'm talking about.
One quick question on
Yeah.
SBA loans. Most of the hotel people, they do go for SBA. Is there any particular reason?
New construction? On hotel new construction?
Some new, some.
Yeah, a lot of my-
Some existing.
Yeah, a lot of my new construction hotels do go SBA because some of the terms for new construction, some of the banks can't do because they're construction perm loans, and they'll do them. But you know, on a existing hotel, I've had very few that go SBA if they're just, you know, if it's an established hotel with a flag and all of that. Now, sometimes some unflagged ones, they'll go SBA because a bank won't touch them. Like I know a couple of banks in town here that if they're not flagged, they will not do a loan on them. That's their policy. They just have evaluated and said the risk is higher if they're not associated with a franchise. So you don't know. Typically, again, it's secured by the real estate and related assets of the borrower. So there, what you do is you have all their inventory that's secured if it's a business, so there's more security involved with it. So debt financing, the borrower can borrow the money to repay plus interest, private. Now, equity financing is a big thing now, raising money by selling interests in the company. So what a lot of people do now is, because there's a lot of money out there, is they'll just say, well, you know, I'm going to put it out there and try to raise money myself. And you can. You got to be careful of SEC and blue sky laws. If you're soliciting outside the state, you could be subject to the SEC rules. You got to be very careful. And if you have a client who says, oh yeah, I'm going to my friends up in New York and I'm going to have them start investing, you better go, have you spoke to an attorney? Now what we do is we do a subscription agreement, an offering agreement, and make sure everything is, sometimes, like I've done some offerings where we had to register with the SEC for the exemption. So we got the exemption from the SEC. It's real easy to do. And they did it that way, but you got to be careful. Well, you don't do it, but the buyer needs to. Government regulation, like we said, state of Florida is pretty good on it. They don't have a lot. And then crowdfunding. Crowdfunding's a new thing. You know, you can go out there and go on the internet, have crowdfunding, put your project up there and get people who will invest in it. So that can be done out there too. There's lots of different opportunities. So again, banks are still the most common. Seller financing happens a lot. I mean, a lot. And one of the reasons is the tax consequence. Because let's say someone like, let's say this building here. I mean, I've owned this building for, gosh, I don't know, 15 years. It's been depreciated out to probably nothing. So if I sell it, I pay capital gains. I'm like, oh, I don't know, my accountants goes, you really, you want to get whacked with all that? Well, I could do a 1031. And that's the other thing too, is anytime you guys, you have a seller on a commercial property, probably about the fifth thing out of your mouth should be, do you consider doing a 1031? We do a whole separate class on that, but you should definitely do that. But one of the things would be is they'll go, well, you know, I'm gonna pay the capital gains on it. Well, I don't really care. Say, well, have you considered maybe doing seller financing? Then you get the payments over a few years, maybe a balloon in 3 or 4 years, and then you have that steady income stream. And then sometimes someone who's looking at retiring, they can go, hey, wait a minute, I kind of like that idea. You know, maybe I'll finance half of it. Maybe if they put down half, and I'll put half in a note, I get a little bit better interest rate. And maybe there's a balloon in 3 to 5 years. I like getting that check once a month. I can use that in my retirement when I'm traveling around the world. You know, so the possibilities are there to do it. And again, it's secured with a note and a mortgage. So again, we have the interest rate, payment schedules, things like that. Sometimes I had one guy too that he said, yeah, I'm going to do owner financing, but I want a prepayment penalty. I'm like, why? He goes, I don't want the money. I don't want to get taxed on it. Right. And he says, if my accountant says, if they pay it off early, I'm really going to get whacked. So just be right up front with them and tell them we're going to do, it's going to be a 5% prepayment penalty. It'll go down every year because I really don't want my money for 5 years. And we told the buyers that up front, and the buyer kind of looked at us going, huh? And we said, it's a tax issue and all that. And the buyer and the seller talked, and the buyers perfectly understand. That's great. I plan on staying here. So it really worked out well, really, really well. So you can get very creative in commercial deals. I mean, really creative on stuff. Whoops. All right. So some of the advantages, the owner has an interest that remains, owner's interest remains the same. The lender has no direct claim on future profits. And this is regular debt financing, the bank. Interest can be deducted. No requirements to seek private investors. No requirements to have meetings of the shareholders. Because if you get investors, I mean, one of the big things I do is if someone says they're going to get investors, when we set up the company, we set up, for example, 2 classes of stock. Membership interest, if it's an LLC, voting and non-voting. And they're like, why would you do that? I said, do you want to run your company or do you want your investors to run it? No, I don't want to hear from them. Exactly. Make them all non-voting so they can't tell you what to do. You can do that? Yeah. So advantage on there, the debt has to be repaid, high borrowing costs sometimes, pledging assets, owners have to be personal guarantee, that's a disadvantage, large debt to ratio, because, you know, a lot of banks want, sometimes they want, you know, 20, 25% down. So there's pluses and minuses on each side. We have to evaluate each one. And that's one of the things we do in the initial meeting, especially with the buyer. So we'll meet with the agent, we'll go with the buyer, and we'll sit down and we'll have all these discussions. Because I guarantee you, there'll be something in there you're going to go, oh, I didn't think of that. So we like to get to feel and know our buyers if we're going to represent them, so we know where they're coming from and we can get all that stuff done. Now, on the seller financing, you know, it's ease of doing it, flexibility. Sometimes it's properties that they won't approve. For example, downtown Orlando, when we had the brown zone, all the Sentinel was polluting the property from the Sentinel all the way down south. So you know where Park North is, the Sevens, Nora. No one could finance that property for years and years and years because no bank would touch it because it was a federal brown zone. So, but private investors would. So you can get a little bit more flexibility on that. One of the things is it doesn't show up on your credit. That can be an advantage or a disadvantage, depending on how you want to look at it. Usually they're higher interest rates. Sometimes people won't do it. Complications for due on sale. You want to make sure it's free and clear on there. All right, with equity financing, funding the company is committed to the business. Investors might provide follow-up on funding, because sometimes we do these, we'll say there's an initial contribution of X amount of dollars. However, that's for acquisition of the property. There will be a second requirement within 12 months that you put in X amount of dollars in the future. So if they don't pay, it can create a problem. There's no debt to repay, so that's an advantage because they are having an interest in the business. Venture capitalists can bring valuable skills. Like that Denver deal I did, was going to do, they had a venture capitalist involved. It was funny because the guy who became her venture capitalist said, I looked at this business, coincidentally, he said, it's too small. It was too small for me, too small of a deal. But he said, I like you, you're going to be, to my client, you're going to be an owner operator. I really believe this business is good. It was a 62-year-old business. And she goes, but I'll give you part of the money and you run it. And I'll, kind of be your consultant. And I'm really bummed that the thing didn't go through because it was going to be a really good deal. Some of the disadvantages, it is costly up front to put together the offering package. The investors want more information. Sometimes the investors want, some management and decision-making ability, depending on how much they're putting in. Warren Buffett, I'm sure, just doesn't say, oh, here's 500 million. He's going to want to know what's going on. And then you have to give regular information to the investor. They're going to expect quarterly reports. You got to make sure you report to them. On bank loans, generally it's accessible. They do have a different loan options. They want to make sure the ownership of the company who's there. They are a little bit lower rates than private. And then the taxes, percentage of the profits used to pay the loan could be exempt. Disadvantages, it's harder for startups because the bank says you don't have a track record. It's a more lengthy application process. They want to make sure it costs more for the appraisal. That's the other thing too. On owner financing, usually you never have to get an appraisal on the property. Sometimes it's more down payment and the shorter loan terms and the personal guarantee. Now, this loan term thing is really, really changing because the banks they're losing commercial business left and right. Because traditionally banks would give a 3 or a 5 year term and then it would balloon. So does anyone know who one of the biggest new players in this whole commercial field is that's really becoming a disruptor to the banks? Anybody? Credit unions. Okay, they're the new disruptor because what they're doing is traditionally credit unions wouldn't make commercial loans. Now they're making them all over the place and they're going to these businesses and going 10 years fixed rate. Like what? Every banker in town is what? For how much? Like I had a client a couple of months ago, credit union said, they went to their bank. The bank said, yeah, maybe we can do it for 5.25 with a point, 3 years, interest only. The guy was like, and then he went to a credit union and they said, we'll do it for 4.5, 10 years fixed. And they're like, how can we do that? So the credit unions are really getting into it. Fairwinds is in it a lot. And then the old Central Florida Teachers Credit Union, which is now Addition Credit Union. I met with their head of their commercial lending department a couple of weeks ago. He said they're doing a lot of commercial loans. As a matter of fact, it's really unusual. They're a credit union. They just bought a bank. They bought Fidelity Bank over in Melbourne, which is very unusual for a credit union to buy a bank. One other small advantage of using a credit union, it actually saves you money. They have the best lobbyists probably in this state. I think it's wrong, but it's there, it's there. When you take a home loan or a commercial loan from a credit union, you do not have to pay intangible tax. Credit unions are exempt from intangible tax. It's the law. I think it's bad, but it's a little extra few bucks in your pocket, so it's good. All right, what type of commercial transaction financing involves giving the lender a membership or stock interest in the buying company? Debt, commercial swap agreements, or equity? Cast your vote. We're gonna have some little Jeopardy music from now on these. Good, equity, right. Debt's a bank. Swap agreements, by the way, nobody uses these anymore. We represent several banks that we do their notes and mortgages. During the boom, we used to put swap agreements in there. We've taken them out of all our loan agreements. No one uses it. It's literally when a bank has an agreement and they'll swap it out with another bank, or they'll swap it for different backings on it. Nobody uses them. But I should say nobody. They use them in huge, huge deals. Same thing like mezzanine financing. Virtually nobody uses that anymore after the crisis. All right, questions. That was a lot of stuff, huh? All right, who's got any questions? You guys here don't type when you can just ask.
Yeah, so previously you talked about the environmental issues.
Mhm.
You mentioned gas stations and dry cleaners.
Right.
What was the particular issue with those?
They're red flags. Okay, so it's gas stations haven't been so bad lately. Florida was in the prior to like 1992, it was a disaster because literally 80% of gas stations had an environmental problem because the state just had no control. They had no inspections. They had no nothing. They had no requirement you change out your tanks. So like 80% of them were leaking. Then the state realized it's a huge environmental problem. And then they started a program that the state actually helped pay or subsidize for cleaning them up. So most of them right now, we very rarely right now have a problem with that. Dry cleaners, what do you do? What do they do with the chemicals? Throw them out the back door, and that still is a problem because a lot of dry cleaners don't take the steps. Now it has gotten better because the counties are going in and really getting on them. So if there's none of those in the area, the banks go, we're good. If there are any, they'll want to do, a phase one just to be sure. But yeah.
So I have a property that used to be a gas station, so do I just do a phase one? And then
Okay, great question. So you have, you're going to be listing it and selling it, or you own
We're
it?
trying to develop it.
Okay, so the first thing you do is you check with DEP, Department of Environmental Affairs, Environmental Protection. They'll have records. So if they have records that the tank was pulled out and they did a soil test, your bank's going to be awesome, good, it's done. Now, if you don't, you got an issue because if those tanks are in there, the bank's going to they're going to require them be removed. You might have to do some treatment if it leaked or whatever it is and just fix it, whatever it is. Yeah. Mechanics? Auto body shops. The banks have problems with those too. They'll, if some banks, they will require phase one. Some of them, they kind of look at them and they go, well, if it's just a small auto body shop and they don't do a lot of heavy stuff, they may not. But more likely if it's if it's an oil changing place, oh yeah, they're going to require one. Would you ever use a letter of intent for a lease? Yes, good question. Yes, I do sometimes use them for leases, on commercial leases, absolutely. Where's the best place to get a thorough exploration of commercial zoning codes? Ooh, there is no one place because every city or county has their own separate zoning. Now, if you want to see them all, there's something called MuniCodes. It's municode.com. They have the municipal zoning regulations of every municipality in the United States. So that's a good place to look it up. What are the first steps to get into commercial? You've taken the first step. You're here. Okay. So that's what it is. Just go out there, read stuff on it. Go out there and try to get it. Whether you got to remember, if you know like a doctor or a lawyer or a dentist that wants an office, and you get them one of those houses like on Robinson, that their offices, you're in commercial real estate. I mean, you can do that. Just talk to people, see what they want to do. The whole thing is mix with people. Is there any drafted letter of intent form we can use? No, there is not. There are not. There aren't, because they're so different. It depends on whether you're doing a warehouse, an office, a hotel. I mean, there's just so much that it covers, retail in commercial. So it's really hard. Yes?
You mentioned previously that you had a property and the zoning was inconsistent with what it was actually showing on the property appraiser's website. I'm just curious how you stumbled upon figuring that out.
Most of the time, what I'll recommend, if I'm representing a buyer, I always recommend we do what's called a zoning letter. So we send a letter to like here, the city of Orlando. I think they charge $50, and they'll send back an official letter signed and sealed saying exactly what the use is, and then they'll enclose the little chart that says what you can use it for. And that way, 100%. Like this one I'm doing in Miami right now. Miami, it's the wild South. So, you never know what's going to, so I told my client, I said, we're going to get a zoning letter in there because it's just so mishmashed everywhere. I mean, literally there's commercial and this dumpy house, and there's like, Gucci, and literally we want to make sure it's going to be there. So yeah. Okay. All right, so, God, I'm almost on time today. That's all good. I'm trying to keep on time. All right, so one of the things is to put on these seminars, we need sponsors. So today we got Bay Equity. Eldon is here, and if any of you watched the TV show, you saw him on there recently. We had a lot of fun doing the interview and the segment, and great office over there. And one of the things I got to tell you, lenders, is a zillion of them out there. I think there's almost as many lenders as there are realtors. But it really does make a big difference of who you use. And, they come, they go, they got programs, all of that. But one of the big things, and it's all about service. And that's one of the things that, Bay Equity has done, is really honed in on that service. And he's going to tell you about that. And I've seen it in action. I've seen how they operate. They're there after hours. They're there, getting the best program for your clients. And that's the big thing right now. Just like, the guy that on the commercial side that says do the SBA loan because it's more in their pocket. That's not the way these guys are. They look at what's best for your client, looking whether it's a 15-year, 20-year, 30-year and all that. But I'll let him explain some of that stuff on there. So I'm so happy that he's sponsoring today, and I know out in the branches, got some of his folks out there too. So all of you out in the branches can meet some of his folks. So come on up and tell them all about, you're all mic'd up and everything.
All right, thank you.
All right, good.
Thank you, man.
Good, thanks.
Absolutely. Like he introduced me, my name's Elgin Press. I'm with Bay Equity Home Loans. I'm the branch manager here. I'm sure most of you haven't heard of Bay Equity Home Loans, and that's because of where we go ahead and spend our money. And I'll go into that a little bit, but a little bit about the company itself. It actually started by a couple brothers out in California back in 2007. Very bad timing for them. They did it right before the recession hit, but they stuck it out, which makes them so unique because even though everything went downhill right after they started, they decided that, hey, this is really what we believe in out in California, and they stuck through it. And then, well, here we are today that they're expanding now all over the East Coast, and they give us an opportunity to open up a branch here in Central Florida. We actually opened up back in December, and there's quite a few of us, and at each of the locations, I know I'm here with you guys, but you'll see different senior loan officers there to help each and every one of you. What makes us different is going to be the level of customer service. And what I mean by that is that we are a local office. We're not just out on the field. Okay, a lot of lenders, they don't find the whole team effort. It's typically you deal with one loan officer and that's it. So it's either that loan officer is or isn't available, and neither they can or they can't help your client. Where we differentiate is that, let's say I'm not available, well, I'm going to pass you on to one of my team members. And if they're not available, we're going to make sure that we have a call center that we're able to pick up and attend your clients during business hours and attend you guys after business hours if need be, because that way we can go ahead and help your clients get there. One of the biggest differences that we do by doing that is that we make sure we guide your clients all the way through that process, because a lot of you will spend a lot of time and money and effort capturing that client. And then you pass that lead on or that client on to a lender or a loan officer or somebody, and then, well, they're forgotten about, or maybe they don't qualify today, and that's it. What do? Well, we make sure that we have follow-up systems in place to protect you by co-branding everything and keeping you in the loop of what's happening. So if that client isn't ready to purchase today, and they will be, let's say, 6 months down the road or 2 years down the road, we can make sure that client doesn't forget about you, since you spent so much time up front capturing that lead. That's really what makes us different than, I would say, other lenders and other loan officers out there. It's going to be that detail up front and throughout the process, because it's not about, do they qualify now, yes or no? It's about, when will they be able to purchase, and how do we keep them with you throughout that process? So when they are able to purchase, or when they have friends while they're getting ready to purchase, they keep referring those clients to you and hopefully build that circle. On that end, about as far as loans go, we only specialize in residential loans. And of course, we do all your traditional products: FHA, conventional, jumbo loans, VA, USDA. We don't lose business over rates. Make sure everyone knows that. Haven't done that. We were talking about rates. Obviously, it depends on the program and everything, but rates are we're already seeing clients closing into 3%, depending on their credit, depending on their terms. So it's rather crazy that not, I would say, 7-8 months ago, we had clients at 5%, and it's already dropped that much. So that's quite interesting, and we do expect that to stay down that way all the way until December, from what we hear and what we're seeing in the marketplace. Along with that, I know that you guys were here for commercial. So a lot of your clients maybe want to keep everything for tax purposes under a business name, but they do want to buy residential. Well, we do offer hard money loans, and we do offer what we call non-QM loans that basically will allow them to purchase under the business name. And depending exactly how that's set up, depends on the little bit of documentation we'll need, or tons, just depending on how they want to set up. But we are able to also offer that, because again, we're specializing on residential loans, but not just your traditional loans on that end, and keeping it that way. That's a little bit about the company. Did want to leave a little bit of room for Q&As, not just here at myself here, but also at the other locations, because I know I have guys there. But if you guys have any questions, please ask away. Oh man, you guys are quiet. Yes, that is the best contact information to reach my team or myself. Okay, and then our office, I know he was talking about the commercial, the big 408 I-4 construction. Our office is right off Lake Lucerne. So literally we're on the 5th story. So literally if you go to our back window, you can see all of it right at eye level. It's pretty cool. So you guys should come visit us. That's a stellar view there. See that?
It's a great space. There's lots of room. And they're very generous in sharing space.
Yeah, we use it.
You come up and take a look and work if you need to. They're really a great team. And what Barry said about their customer service was spot on. I've watched Elgin and Blair and their team. I've watched their team grow, and I've known them for over a year now. And I can't tell you how impressed I am by their level of service and the level of dedication to innovation and getting the best to your customers and the best rate. They're a very strong team.
Thank you, Meredith. Any questions? Cool. Any questions at the other branches, David? It looks like, no? All right. And if not, then I think it's lunchtime, right?
Lunchtime. Lunch is served down in the
Perfect.
lobby.
Thank you, guys.
All right, now we're seeing everyone in there. I'm like, sure.
Oh, Altamont Springs get tables.
What's it?
Let's go Altamont Springs.
Yeah. All right, Altamont, how's the barbecue? Good? How about out there, Susie? You like that? What are you having today? Hot dog, hamburger? All right, let's kind of go back to the slides. All right, so first again, thanks for our sponsors for coming in. As you can always tell, we had a 4th of July themed, lunch today, our little barbecue. All right, couple of things to kind of remind you about. If you don't already know, we've got a TV show every Sunday, 9:30, channel 27. Submit your listings to orestv.com. It doesn't cost you anything. And it's a good way if you're marketing, trying to get a listing, telling your seller that their property can be listed on the show. We're going into our 2nd season. We just filmed a whole bunch of new stuff on it for the new season. So there's going to be a lot of new content on there too. So tune into that. The other thing too is our own Christian Walters now is a licensed mediator. So whether it's escrow disputes or any other kind of things, we can do mediation for you. We have those mediation services. So just let us know. And I always try to recommend people go to mediation before they go to litigation. It's just a very cost-efficient way to try to resolve problems. Whoa. Okay, why is this thing? I don't know. Do we have the leads thing? Oh, okay. So the other thing too is in your packages, if you're a customer of ours, we have a new service. It's agent lead service. Okay, it's in your package here. So it's through the largest database. It's Title Pro 24/7, largest real estate database in the country. If you signed up on your own, you'd have to pay a monthly maintenance fee. So if you do it through us, you don't have to pay the maintenance fee, plus it's a discount. So if you're doing just sold, just listed, postcards or letters, we had an agent in that wanted a client to live in a certain subdivision so she could pull up everybody in there. It's so sophisticated. So you could take a neighborhood, let's say it's a neighborhood that's 10 years old, and you're like, there's probably people in there, the kids are growing up. Maybe they're thinking of downsizing. You can go into the system and say, I want anyone in this subdivision who has no children, because thinking they already moved out. You could send them a letter saying, thinking about downsizing, selling your house. Do just the opposite. You could go in and say, oh, this is a subdivision. Most of the houses have 3 bedrooms. I want to go in and see anyone that has 4 or more children. Do a little letter to them. Need more space? I can help you find a bigger house. So it really is very sophisticated on what you can find and the way you can do it. You can look for people that are in foreclosure. You can, there's all kinds of parameters in there. So if you want to get signed up with that, it exports to Excel, PDF, different things you can generate. Labels, and you only pay for the leads that you download. So it's a great tool in there to use if you're looking at farming and trying to find some new ways to generate business. So take a look at that. You can contact David Hollenby to get you set up on that. Okay, so one of the biggest things in commercial real estate, in the residential, we have, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't follow the contract, is you have to get estoppel letters from your tenants. And commercial, it's a must. I had an agent last September that didn't get it, and they didn't do it. They closed in September. In October, they got a call from the title company to the buyer. Oh, did you get the check from October from the tenant? And they go, yeah. Well, you need to send that to the seller. He goes, what? Well, the tenant didn't pay their September rent, so that check that you got, you need to send that to the seller. And then, you need to go to them and tell them you need the October rent. Well, luckily they called me and I said, no. I said, what did your estoppel letter say? What's an estoppel letter? Okay. This is suicide if you don't do it. So an estoppel letter is a letter to the tenant that confirms that, and sometimes it's also lenders, commercial lenders always require these. So it's an agreement between the purchaser, lender, and a tenant. And first of all, the tenant agrees to be subordinate to any rights of the lender. Okay, because the lender wants to make sure in first position. Non-disturbance, lender agrees not to interfere with the tenant operations. And attornment, in the event of a borrower defaults, the tenant agrees to recognize the lender as the party to pay rent, because all commercial loans have either built into the mortgage or a separate assignment of leases and rents. So that way, if you default, the lender just sends a letter to your tenant saying the owners in default start sending the rent to us. So you got to have these up front. So is it used to provide priority to the lender's interest, provide a faster eviction process, to force a tenant to recognize the lender as its landlord after foreclosure, contractually require the lender to refrain from interfering with the tenant's lease of the property, or A, C, and D? Okay, A, gives priority to the lender's interest? Yes. Provides faster eviction? No. Forces a tenant to recognize the lender as its landlord after foreclosure? No. Contractually requires the lender to refrain from interfering with the tenant's lease? No. Okay, so it's A. Okay, we kind of tricked you in there. That's why you got to read that language in there kind of quick. Okay, so generally the closings, as I said, are longer periods of time than residential, because a lot of times, sometimes you need to have government approval, zoning, use, and access. It's not uncommon that you have a commercial contract and it is subject to either zoning approval or other requirements. Like we do a lot of development work. Like we had one recently where we're doing 12 townhomes downtown. Well, it was vacant land. Well, the buyer wanted it and the seller wanted to sell it, but right now it was not approved for the 12 townhomes. So my guy wasn't going to buy it and then roll the dice whether he can do it or not. So we said, we're going to make it subject to it. We had to put language in there that the buyer would be responsible for getting the approvals for it. But we had to put language in there, the seller will sign off on any applications, because you got to make sure to put that in, because otherwise the seller will go, you go do it on your own. I'm not signing anything. Well, if they don't sign anything, you're never going to get it. So that's a simpler way. Then other times we have to get the property rezoned. That can take several months. Sometimes we have to replat the property. Like, for example, we do some subdivisions. We're doing some up in Volusia County where we had to get the subdivision approved. I mean, sometimes that takes 6 months to a year. But, you know, but it was a $20 million deal. So the agents were like, I'm going to wait, get involved in it, because we had to get the roads done. We had to get them approved. We had to get the lots done. We had to talk about infrastructure. There's a lot of missing things in there. And that's why a lot of things on there. Some agents get very involved in it. Most do not. And that's why it's good if you have a good commercial real estate attorney, you align yourself is, you just give it to us. We keep you advised on what's going on. You don't have to waste your time on it. And we'll just give you updates and then go sell some more property. So that's why it's got a good return on it. Now, appraisals are more subjective. A lot of times they're based on rental rates. So sometimes they'll do it on, they have to take into account what the rents are coming in for, because the lender will say that determines whether the risk on it. And again, always the environmental assessment that we talked about before, that's very, very big. Now, the other thing too is environmental assessment is what's the buyer going to use the property for? Okay, now if they're going to put in there, if it's a warehouse and they're going to be putting in a dry cleaning facility, a lot of lenders are going to be, I think we're going to pass. Okay, they don't want the risk, because if there's an environmental problem created, let's say there's a dry cleaner and they end up polluting the land, and then they get the property back by foreclosure. Guess who's got to clean it up? The bank does. So they're very, very leery about stuff like that. We've had some ones where the bank ends up doing them, but they'll require the lender to hire an outside company to monitor and inspect them to make sure there's no environmental problems. I had one client that was like, she was outraged and da, 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 da. And I'm like, look, you've gone to how many lenders? He goes, oh, about 12. And I go, this is the only lender that's going to do it. It's part of the cost of doing business. I mean, so just do it. Oh, I don't like it. I said, I know you don't like it, but you want the loan and want the deal? Yeah. So you kind of got to do it. And the cost wasn't that bad. I mean, it wasn't really that bad. But he kept saying, insisting, but I don't do any of those environment. I'm an environmentalist. I said, well, great. So just do it. I said, do it. And you know something? After 2 years, when everything's good, you get good reports, maybe we'll go to the lender then and say to them, hey, can we drop the monitoring service? Or instead of doing it quarterly, do it once a year. And the guy said, And he went and talked to the bank. And the bank said, yeah, actually, your attorney's right. After a year, or maybe probably 2 years, if everything's good, we probably will drop it completely. And he's like, oh, great, we can do that. All right, so the Commission Lien Act on commercial liens. Okay, so in order to get the lien, you have to have commercial liens require a written contract. So the broker and the owner of the real estate, for the owner's net proceeds and costs of the owner to sell, must include the required disclosure that the broker has the lien right. So luckily in the FAR commercial contract, it does have that disclosure in there. So you just have to have your paperwork, and we can help you with that up front to make sure you get that. So they have to provide a sworn commission notice to the owner and the closing agent within 30 days of earning the commission, at least 1 day before closing. If the notice is not provided, the lien cannot be enforced. The lien will attach with the owner's net proceeds. I've never had a commercial broker that's had to do this. I've had them threaten a few times, but we never really have, because when we run them pretty tight. We make sure it's in the contract. And then usually when we're involved, we're closing it, and we'll protect our broker and make sure it's in there. So, but I've heard horror stories where the seller will say, nope, I instruct the title company, don't pay them. I have a dispute with them. Well, they got to do what the seller says to do. But if you follow this, then they'll have a lien on it, and you can do it. So it's good to do. It's good practice to do. Just like in the residential, I always tell you, make sure you have a signed buyer's rep agreement. It's the same thing like doing this. Have your ducks in a row, make it part of your practice. All right, so the notice has to have the name of the owner of the commercial property. It has to have a legal phone number, the name, mailing address, phone number, license number of the broker, effective date of the brokerage agreement, the amount, either as a dollar amount or the sales or the percentage. You have to have a statement that the broker has read and knows the commission notice, believes it to be true and correct, and a statement of delivery of the notice to the owner, and you record that in the public records. And it says if the owner disputes the claim commission, then they have 5 days before closing to notify the closing agent. So it really it's a great way to protect everyone, because it's gets recorded. All right, municipal and land use. This is, again, a big barrier. This is where sometimes things fall down. City municipal codes that restrict use. And you can't just take the opinion, because I've had realtors, real estate agents who will say, oh, it's fine. That's what was here before. That's good. No. First of all, the prior owner may have been using it as a non-conforming use. They may have been grandfathered in, and the city or the county said that's fine, but once you close, it reverts back. So you don't fall into that trap. A lot of people do. And zoning classes may forbid operation of a business. So, and a lot of people don't realize, just because it's an office doesn't mean you can have a doctor's office there. Okay, because doctor's offices, medical requires more parking under the code. Generally, offices are 4 per 1,000. Medical is usually 6 per 1,000. So it depends on where you're at. In medical, they always want a lot of parking. We just had a client on 4th and 36 that was putting up a medical building. The city said, 40 spaces, that's how much zoning is. And he's like, it's not going to do it. I'm not going to have my people cramped in here for parking and parking all over the place. He says, I want another 70. I've got the space in the back. And the city said, no. no, we're not going to have all that parking. It's, it's going to be bad. So, we set up, so what we did is they told him no, but the problem was it wasn't presented in the right way. So what we did is we got with his engineers and we had a layout done that was different. We set up a meeting with all the department heads. We kind of explained things to them. We kind of used some incentives with them because they're big on public transportation. One of the big things was, well, how close is there a bus stop? There's one up front. Well, we want you to get your people to use the bus stop and use the buses. Great. We'll put it in their employee manual. We'll put it on the bulletin board, all that. We even said, how about if we pay for half their monthly bus pass? And they're like, okay. The head guy said, okay. The transportation guy said, no. What are we going to do? Who's going to monitor that? We're not going to do that. He was like Mr. No. Mr. No to everything. So luckily the head of the department was like, right in front of him, said, I'm overruling you. He goes, look, if they're willing to do this and they're going to put it out there and they're going to pay for that, and we're not going to give them 70, we're going to give them instead, I think we got them another 40 or 45 on top of his 40. He goes, we'll compromise. They're willing to compromise, we'll compromise. We made it, and we made it work. So they were happy and it turned out. But you got to be careful on this because sometimes you can get in there and the parking's not right, or all kinds of other things, and it can really screw things up in there. All right, so we talked about the FAR commercial contract, good for smaller. Larger transactions require some custom contracts. And just so you know, you generally cannot call up an attorney and go, hey, can I come by this afternoon and pick up, I'm going to email you over the details. Can I come by this afternoon and pick up a contract? I usually say we want fries with that and pick it up at window 2. Okay. People think that we just have, well, you have a template. No, we don't have a template. The template's called the FAR. And if I can use it, I'll use it. But if not, yes, we have some basic terms, but it takes, 2-3 hours to put them in. I mean, we know, and sometimes we have a big firm on the other side, and it could be a simple contract. They look at it this way. Some of these big firms in town, what they do is they look at it and go, yeah, probably 15, 20 grand we can build a client on this. Like, they really sit there and they're obstructionists. So they'll sit and they'll do it. And we had one with a big firm that we sent it over, and the guy marked it all up by hand. And I'm like, I can't read your writing. You need to have your secretary, use it in Redline. First of all, they didn't even know how to use Redline. You ever know what Redline is, by the way? Redline in Word, you press, and it comes out in red, and then ours is in red, and theirs will be in blue. It's real easy to use. Some firms in town, by the way, have a policy they do not send in Redline. I'm like, why? Well, we PDF them to you. And I'm like, well, that's no good. It's not the spirit of cooperation to get it done. So this other firm, we told him, no, we're not going to make his changes, and you got to have yours. And then we kept saying, you're going to have it to us tomorrow. And it was 4 days later because his paralegal said, we called her up and she's like, well, I can't read his writing. Remember? But it was frustrating. So some of these ones are, they're big contracts. And this negotiations back and forth. So you got to remember when you do these, it's not like a residential that go back and forth real quick. It's common that they take, sometimes weeks to negotiate and go back and forth. The big thing is on the FAR one is make sure, again, you have your parties and property right, especially on commercial, because sometimes, as we said before, the owner running the business has a separate company that owns the property. So when you're taking the listing, make sure it's the right company that is listing it, that is selling it is the owner, not necessarily operating the business. You got to be careful. Street addresses sometimes on commercial property are kind of wonky because they may have a building where they are and then a warehouse here, and they're selling the warehouse. So you can't be careful of the address. The address is for the office, not the warehouse they're selling. So you got to be real careful. Same thing, description of personal property being sold. If you're selling an office, what's going with it? Some of them will say, well, I want all the filing cabinets, what's built in, what's not built in, other things that are going to go with it. So you got to make sure and be careful and go through all of that. Now, one of the flaws, because you guys know how I love picking out flaws in pre-printed contracts. The escrow on the FAR contract, so I had one a month ago, and it was a $50,000 deposit. It's going to close 60 days. And the agent called me up and said, did he make the deposit? I said, no, we don't have it. Called up the other agent, the listing agent called up the buyer's agent. Hey, we don't have the deposit. Oh, let me call the buyer, see where that's at. You know what the buyer said? I'm going to make that deposit the day before closing. Do we have a breach of contract? How many say yes? How many say no?
Yeah, it says within a few days.
Huh?
Most contracts have a date.
Most do. The FAR one doesn't. That's why it's not a FAR bar, because the bar would never allow something like, there's a flaw in there. It doesn't say when the buyer has to make their deposit. So this guy was sharp. He goes, I've been through this before. No one caught it, so I'm going to make it the day before closing. So he can. So we always put in the addendum, deposit shall be made within 3 days. We also put in there too that all funds have to be wired, because that's something they got to make sure that's on there. Time for acceptance of a counteroffer in there. It's pre-printed. They'll be 3 days after the offer is delivered. Effective date is the day on which the latter of the buyer and the seller signed or initialed and delivered the offer. So it's similar to the FAR bar. And again, don't use on or before, guys. No on or before, residential, commercial, whatever it is. I keep saying this and I keep seeing them. Don't do it. Closing date information, you got to make sure to have that in there. A lot of times in the commercial arena, I see when it has the closing date, they'll go 65 days. 65 days from what? Effective date, inspection date, what it is. And then I'm like, did you count the days? No. Well, I just wondered, they put 66 days. Well, by the way, there's this great thing. If you Google this, count the days, there's just software. You can put any day in and put another date. It'll tell you how many days, or you do dates, whatever which way you want to include the date, not include the date. It's called count the days. It's always up on my computer. So I did he put 66 days and I put up, I go, it's a Sunday. He goes, so? I'm like, well, I know the contract says if it ends on the day, it'll be the next day, but why don't we just do it right? And why don't we just put a date in? Well, this is commercial. We don't like doing things like that. I'm like, well, we should. So always put the days in. Third-party financing, buyer notification of seller. That's got to be made clear. There is no provision for cash or seller financing in the FAR contract. So you got to be careful of that. Title assures the seller's capacity to convey title. The seller will give evidence to the buyer of title within blank days after the effective date or before closing. I always want to get your title commitment within your inspection period. Let's know up front if there is. And by the way, there's two things on there: title commitment or an abstract. Has anyone in this room ever closed a deal, commercial or residential, with an abstract of title? Anyone know what an abstract is? You do?
I'm from Buffalo, so the houses up there are very old and they have a book of all the previous owners.
Yeah, so an abstract is like a phone book. It literally has everything in it. By the way, I have one that I got years ago that the very first one there is the grant from the King of Spain. Okay, it's really old. I have another one that's really old, and it's from the when when Florida was established. Nobody uses abstracts anymore. If you use it, they check the box that they want to use an abstract, you're dealing with a novice who has no idea what they're doing. Hey, by the way, you know the guy on the $10 million deal out of Miami that said, hey, can't we just use the FAR and forget about your addendum? Guess what he checked? An abstract. That was our second clue. He had no clue what he's doing. You never use an abstract. They're just obsolete. I don't even know why they have it on there anymore. Nobody uses them in Florida. So you always want to get your commitment. Now, Commitments are very different. And as I've told you before, depending on who the title agent's underwriter is, there can be drastic differences in what's in there, especially on commercial ones. Because, you know, some of these residential more geared underwriters are not used to doing commercial. And if they do their commitment by a residential examiner, they're going to miss things or they won't understand things. They put things in that don't matter. So you want to make sure it's someone that does a lot of commercial stuff that knows what they're doing. I had one just last week where there was two parts to this deal. We're doing one with our underwriter, Old Republic. They're doing one with someone who shall remain nameless that did it. And the client just said, well, that other title company is removing these two things. We want you to remove them. It was an easement in a corridor of a commercial condo. And I'm like, but we can't delete it. Well, we're going to have to go with them. We're going to drop you guys because you're not going to do it. And I said, well, you know, luckily I was dealing with in-house counsel. And I said, well, wait a minute. When you own in a condominium, you own a undivided interest in the common elements. So even though this easement was on the 15th floor and we're buying on the 11th floor, it was, what they did is they gave them an easement over part of the hallway. So I said, you on the 11th floor have the right to use that hallway on the 15th floor, don't you? Yeah. I said, you're an attorney, you understand that. So therefore it's an exception on the title. Well, they're willing to take it off. I said, well, they're wrong. Well, you know, my people want to go with them then because they're going to give us a better policy. I said, but it's still wrong. I said, do you agree with me? It is wrong. He goes, yeah. Well, we might go with them. I mean, they've finally agreed not to, but you got to know what they're doing. We had another one recently where it's for a big subdivision, and it's the same underwriter. I just realized it, a national underwriter. They were calling for a probate from the 1930s from a family that owned a sliver of property in this huge up at Apopka piece of property. And we got it. We looked at it with our underwriter, and my client's very knowledgeable, and his family's owned the property for a while. And he came in, and our underwriter came in, their VP came in to go over it. And I said, well, I got some good news and some bad news for you. The good news is the other people are wrong. We don't need a probate. He's like, oh, that's wonderful. I said, what's the bad news? I said, that sliver of land in there has never been deeded out. So we need to go back, and luckily we won't have to. It's a different family. It was one of the old citrus families in Orlando. Luckily, we went ahead and already tracked down the 3 heirs, and we're just going to get a quick claim deed from them, an affidavit of heirship. We're not even going to require a probate on it, and we're getting it done. So, and the guy was asking all kinds of right questions about what it is. He knew the property, and afterwards he said, how did that other company screw this up so bad? And I said, because they believe in quantity over quality. And the guy said it was pretty eye-opening. So you got to make sure everything's done in there. And again, get it during your inspection. If you're on the listing side, we do the free title search on commercial deals too. So, you know, get those into us so we can go through them, make sure there's no problems on them. It also says the buyer will deliver written notices of any title defects within 15 days of receipt of the title evidence, which is the commitment. Buyer accepts the defects if they fail to deliver notice or deliver notice to the seller to cure them. So sometimes a buyer may say that's fine. Sometimes they say they were not. One of the things we do for some of our underwriters, we do claims work. So for some of the underwriters, when they have a problem. So we had one recently that was a golf course, and literally there was a sliver of land on the top and on the bottom that the owner found out and said, well, there's a mistake here. I didn't get this property. So they went back and researched it. The bottom was fine. The guy was wrong. The top property, they ended up finding out that the, I won't say which county, but the county property appraiser and tax collector, when they sold a tax deed, had the wrong legal in it. And it created a gap in there. So basically what we're going to do now is we're going to go back to the county to try to get it corrected through there. But again, these things, when they're, especially a lot of the commercial ones are meets and bounds. So when you get into meets and bounds, you can have a degree or, a feet instead of inches, and it can screw the whole thing up. So it's very, very meticulous on it. The other thing too, it requires the seller will deliver copies of prior surveys to the buyer. Then the buyer can obtain a current survey at the buyer or the seller's expense. I've yet to have a seller who will say, sure, I'll buy your new survey for you. I don't know why it's on there. Encroachments can be accepted to the buyer or will constitute a defect. We always check the box that says it's a defect because we want to make sure it can be created. The other thing too is a lot of times on these commercial ones, like this big deal we had, they put on there for the use and all that. Buyer accepts all items on seller's current owner's policy. So as soon as I got that, I wrote to the attorney saying, I need the policy. I can't sign this without seeing it. Well, it is what it is. I said, okay, so if it has on there that this can only be used for residential and the 5-story commercial building's worthless, then it is what it is. He goes, well, I guess I should get a copy of that, shouldn't I? I said, yeah, we're not signing it until I get a copy of it. I still don't have it. It's a week later. So again, you got to make sure what's on there and make sure it's right because it could inhibit the whole thing. So they have as is in a due diligent period. The due diligent is very much like the residential. The buyer can determine it's suitable. They have to deliver notice of acceptability or else the as is assumed. There is walkthrough inspections allowed, similar to residential, which is good. The other important thing is operation of the property during the contract period. The seller can continue to use the property as they have been without adversely affecting the property. The issue is tenant issues, new tenants. So if you're selling the property, obviously, if you're a buyer, you don't want your seller to rent out the property and bind you to a 5-year lease. So from a buyer's perspective, even from the seller's perspective, I always say, check the box that says we're not going to do it without the buyer's permission, because you don't want to get into that. It has the closing procedure in there, the delivery or possession and occupancy of the buyer, and it sets forth the costs in there. There, it's got a box on there. It's different than the FAR bar of whether the seller or the buyer. Now, on commercial deals, it's similar to residential, but it's all negotiable. I mean, I've had ones where the seller will tell them right up front, I'm not paying for title, let the buyer pay it. So it's more negotiable in the commercial deals than it is in residential. So they've got to do a deed, a bill of sale, mechanics lien affidavit. Contracts can be assumed by the buyer. And then you have to decide what kind of deed, quit claim, warranty deed, or special. Now, usually in commercial deals, we usually 9 times out of 10 will use a special warranty deed. The buyer has to provide a closing statement, mortgage and notes, security agreements, and their financing. The reality is the FAR contract says the buyer will provide the closing statement. If the seller's providing title, I've never had a buyer provide it. We just go ahead and do it. Now, I will tell you if it's Miami, they will expect the buyer to do it because that's just the way they operate down there. Taxes and prorations, it sets forth the procedure in there, special assessments, and then FIRPTA. Of course, it is subject to FIRPTA. So you've got to have that discussion with your seller up front to make sure there's no FIRPTA issue involved. It also sets forth the escrow agent's duties in there. Now, there's a built-in cure period. So you've got to be aware of that. I think that's good because when you're dealing on these highly sophisticated and more sophisticated items, you want to have that in there. I don't use the gotcha theory. If someone has an issue, give them a chance to cure it. You can put how many days you'll have to cure it. It has a blank in there. The return of the deposit, the buyer must comply with the conditions of the contract, obviously, to get their deposit back if they're entitled to it. The seller, if on the default, if the failure is for the seller, the deposit obviously goes back to the buyer and they can seek specific performance. So the buyer can sue the seller to do that. Now, when we're doing these contracts for a seller, we will take out the specific performance. Why? I represent the seller. I want to make sure it's good for them. On the default, on the buyer side, the seller can retain the deposit for liquidated damages. And then the deposit will get split with the broker, or again, seek specific performance. So it's a similar standard on there. There is a built-in attorney's fees. Prevailing party is in there. Notices, it's built in there of how notice is to be given. I know a lot of you in residential leave those lines blank. I don't know why you do it. You're opening yourself up to liability. In most cases, I don't want the other side to know their address. Look, in today's world with the internet, you can find anyone, but it's good to put there even on the residential, because it's got to be official notification. They send it to you, because I had this happen to someone the other day. They sent it to the agent. The agent was away for 2 weeks on vacation. They didn't get it. It caused the seller to be in default of the contract. And the buyer said, well, I had no address for the seller, so I couldn't do it. So it's in the FAR contract. It's all in there with their addresses. In a commercial contract, everyone always fills those out. Disclosures, again, the Commission Lien Act we talked about, special assessments imposed by public bodies. Sometimes they were, that could be a big play on what's going on. If you're doing a project, some of these big commercial subdivisions they're doing, like there's one out by Sand Lake Road, you got to be real careful because they have it's a commercial warehouse area. My client didn't realize it when he went under contract. Luckily, it was in the due diligence period, and we found it out. There was, in that case, it ranged between $5,000 and $15,000 initial special assessment by the commercial HOA. And my buyer was like, no way, I'm not doing it. He got out of the deal. So we got to be careful of that. Radon gas disclosure, of course, energy efficient rating information is on there too. There's obviously the standard risk of loss. The seller takes the risk of loss, but the buyer has the option to continue. So, it's different from the residential. So that this time it gives the buyer that your broker information is there. And then there's one thing I hate about the FAR. They have a separate, a 2 or 3 page optional, and it's very confusing because each paragraph has a place to initial. So the problem is, even though the first 4 you don't want to use, is a 2 page. Let's say I think the first page has like 8 of them. And the second page has got like 4. But like the last few deals I had, they only wanted to use the 4th one down. They filled in the information. We got it back and they initialed all the other ones. I'm like, guys, the other one, it has nothing to do with it. Oh, I don't know. It was just there. So we initialed it. And I said, no. We got to fix this right away. So it's a really bad form. We're doing one right now that they insist on using the commercial contract. So we're going to take the additional terms that we want to use and take out. Instead of using the FAR addendum, we're going to extrapolate them and put them on the additional terms so there's no confusion on there. Okay, questions? It's a lot of stuff, huh? But you can really, really get into this. And what I always recommend is, if your first deal, look at your brokerage and see if you can find someone else that's done them and ask them to be your mentor. All right. And if you can't find something on there, we certainly can try to help you do it. But it's really good to hook up with somebody, either your broker or someone else in the office that does commercial, because there's so many different facets of it, and get your feet wet in it. And the more it's just like anything else, the more you do, the better you're going to get at it, the more things you're going to see. And one of the good things, that I like about this end of law, and for me, is it's always something different. Just when I thought I've heard it all, here's something new. That's the way it is with the commercial stuff. It keeps going on. Yeah.
Quick question. We have that service for $995 in residential real estate, where the attorneys will represent the buyer and review
Seller.
contracts and review the title policy, et cetera. Do you have that same program with commercial stuff?
We do. We kind of, they generally will be around 1,500 because there's a lot more work involved. So yeah, great question. We do have that for it. Usually the average deal that's used a FAR contract is about 1,500 on it. If it's something that's much bigger, and that's something we can just use a FAR contract and maybe existing building. If it's something that's developing and all kinds of other issues, and it's a 40 or 60 page contract, obviously not. So again, once you get your buyer or your seller get with us. We can go over everything on there. Again, have a little meeting, even if it's a phone conference with everyone on the phone, and get all the issues in there. Okay, do you do quiet title for tax deed sale for list property? Yes, we do. Not related to this, but yes, we do quiet title. Generally, everyone knows if you get a tax deed, we cannot write title insurance on it. You have to do a quiet title action. Generally, they're $2,500 plus the filing fees. What are the most common appropriate expected commission rates specifically for hotel business? You know, they're all over the place. I've seen some for 10% on commercial deals, and I've seen them for 2%. It's just, it depends on who it is, what it is, how specialized it is. You know, I've seen some people who use very special property and they get 10% because it's a very narrow market of buyers and sellers. And this one guy, it was a type of warehouse and equipment that he has all the contacts and he can get 10%. I've seen other ones on these hotels. We got some of these big commercial places. They get it down. They'll go out there to do 2%. I think that's ridiculous that they do it for 2%. And you know, sometimes I tell clients, you get what you pay for too. You know, 2%, they're not going to put something together to you that's really good. They're not going to, they'll be there to follow up. So it's all over the place. Yeah.
Commercially, is it common not to share with the co-broker? Because
No, you do.
big companies, they do, like CBRE, Martin Chips.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, it's common to co-broker. Oh, they don't?
They don't.
They won't co-broke at all?
I am at an issue, you're right. Push and we all of them, and please get it in writing. Because I've taken it verbally and they change. Once your client gets interested, the whole game starts changing. Get everything in writing.
Yeah, that's the other thing too is, and that's why, for example, in the FAR commercial contract, it will put right in there who's getting paid. And by the way, I don't like the thing is by separate agreement. If I'm representing the buyer and the buyer's agent, that agreement is with who? The seller and the listing agent, not the buyer. So I don't just go for that. We just had that the other day and they put per separate agreement. We were representing the buyer. I said, we can leave that, but we're going to put in there 3% of the purchase price to be paid at closing. So
They bully you.
They what?
They bully you. They can't do that.
Right, they do.
They bully you. They tell you that we're not paying, we're not this.
They
we're
don't
not
have
that.
to. They don't.
Their agreements are co-broke with the sellers.
Well, that,
So,
that we're not privy to, but I mean, they can't have an agreement with their seller that says we're not going to co-broke. Look, you know, that whole class action suit out of Chicago, guys, is all about co-brokering. If they're successful in that class action on the residential side, you're going to see co-broking go away. And it's going to become buyer, you want an agent, pay for it. Pay for it. That's what that whole class action is about. The seller there is saying, why should I have to pay the buyer's agent? If the buyer wants an agent, let him pay for it. Do I pay the appraisal? No. Do I pay their inspection? No. Pay your own broker. And I can, you know, listen, there's arguments on both sides. What happens? Who knows? Are additional deposits common? Yes. Yes, yes, yes. I insist all the time on them. So if you've got initial deposit at the end of due diligence, I always get an extra more deposit. What is a fee for an attorney to write an LOI? Well, LOIs usually are not that much. It's, you know, I don't know, $300-400. Custom contract, it depends on what it is. It really just depends on what we can, you know, what's involved in it. You know, if it's a hotel, it's obviously more because there's a lot more going on. You know, every time I do a hotel, and I've done a lot of them, is I always tell the client I want to come, if I'm on the listing side, even if I'm on the buyer side, I want to go out and walk the property with my client. And they always say, well, I'm not paying, I don't want to pay you to do that. And I always have, when they start that, and I always try to explain to them. And then I finally say to them, I'll tell you what, I'll come out for 2 hours. We know that it'll probably be an hour, but I'll come out maximum 2 hours. And if I don't save you money, and if you don't say at one point, I didn't realize that, I didn't know that, good point, you don't have to pay me. Okay, they always pay me because they come out there and they're like, I never thought of that. I didn't know about that. Because think about it, a hotel. Staff, are they leased? Or are they employees? The linens, do they own them or is there a linen service? maintenance contracts, the vending machines. Do they sublet some of the property there? Liquor licenses. There's so many different factors involved in there. As we walk the property, all this stuff comes up. One of the times I walked a property with a client and I went, asbestos? He goes, oh no, the seller said there's no asbestos in here. I said, that's asbestos. He had his own guy come out as GC. He didn't even have to have it. He has GC come out and he goes, yeah, he's right. And my client says, run. I go, yeah, fast, run. So there's a lot of moving parts. Should we have optional clauses addendum filled out along with contract for each offer? If they apply, you have to see if they apply. And if they apply, you use them. Again, on stuff like this, it's just better. Get yourself aligned with us. Get your buyer or seller conditioned right up front. That what do? You list the property and get a buyer for them. If you're the buyer's agent, you find the property and do that. You have a license to sell and to acquire property, not to write contracts and special clauses and think of everything legally that's got to be in there. Let us do that. And then while we're doing all that, you go sell 2 or 3 more properties. It's just so much more efficient. And again, the liability factor goes down for you. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, should it be a separate contract for the co-broke? It's not necessary, as long as it's in the contract, because the seller will sign it. And if the seller signs on there, they're going to pay you whatever that, 2, 3, 4%, they're obligated to pay it to you. It doesn't matter whatever their agreement is with the listing agent. You have a signature from the seller that they're paying you that at closing. So you'll be safe. Yeah. We don't have to. Yeah. Meredith, what do we have next month? What's our topic next month? Oh, geez. Okay, that's a little scary. Supplemental business for real. What? Supplemental business for real estate agent. How to expand and grow your practice. Okay, so that's what's next month. Oh, yeah. So in case any of you guys don't know, Florida now has adopted e-notarization. It doesn't go into effect until January 1st. We've already been doing it for 2 years. We're the only title company that's been doing it for 2 years. So what we do is you can't use a Florida notary for online. So we use Virginia notaries because it's legal there. Our underwriters allow us to do it. The problem is the lenders won't let you do it. All right. They cannot vet them, because one of the things for the fraud is they've got to vet them, and they have to have a social security number, tax ID number, so they can put them through, because they say, what color is your first car? What street did you grow up on? Whatever it is, they find this stuff out about you. In foreigners, they can't do it. We are working with another vendor. They've had a setback for about 6 months. Hopefully they're going to be out by the time the January one comes around. They do it on passports. So they do it from 220 countries. So that's going to be a thing. I think most of the lenders are going to jump on board. Later, Fannie and Freddie have said they want to do it. So it's going to happen in Florida. Now, notaries, to be able to do this, you can't be a regular notary. The Department of State is promulgating rules and regulations right now. But one of the things that's in the statute, any notary will have to take a special 2-hour course and have a separate certification to do e-notarization. So you got to be careful of that after the January 1st. Some of these notaries won't know it, and they're going to try to do it. Your document will not be valid. Will not be valid, because we already anticipate that to be a problem. We don't know how the state's going to try to do it. We're hoping they're going to use a separate seal for us that are going to be certified, and it will have just not only your notary, but it'll be a notary one that will say e-notarized certified by the state of Florida. I hope they do that. All right, again, if we can help you anything with your practice, let us know. We're here for you. Thank you for your business. We appreciate it.